USA.
The Expanded University, imaginative and boundless. The Star Wars Expanded Universe, with tens of thousands of pages and tens of millions of words, has existed in practice, if not in name, for decades. Speaking of the name, when did we start calling it the Expanded Universe? The answer, or rather, the journey to finding the answer, turned out to be more interesting and fun than I could have imagined. The term as applied to creative works is probably derived from one of my favorite authors, Robert A. Heinlein, and the name of his book of collected essays and short stories. Based on the back of the first edition of the book, the name was alluding to the new knowledge you could acquire about the topics he covers in the book, and even perhaps more insight into the thoughts of the man himself. Of course, the term itself is derived from the phenomenon that has been observed by Edwin Hubble and others for 100 years. When did we start calling it the Expanded Universe? Flipping through a few old magazines and books, I expected to find a quick answer, but it wasn't there, so I emailed an authority, Bill Slavicsek of West End Games fame. He's a premier Star Wars reference book author and lore guru of the 90s. He actually wrote the second and third editions of A Guide to the Star Wars Universe. Surprisingly, he promptly replied with some information based on memory, as he said he didn't have anything in his notes. Unfortunately, and with all due respect, the information was not useful, so I hit the archives. Depending on how one defines the Star Wars Expanded Universe, an argument could be made that it was born in 1976, well before the first film, in the form of the first edition of the novelization. The book introduced off-screen elements and unspoken dialogue that presented additional lore to readers. The souvenir program released with the film featured background info and profiles that went beyond that which was revealed in the film. Later in 1977, much of this information and accompanying photos were released in later editions of the novelization, including the pictured Science Fiction Book Club hardcover edition and second printing of the paperback. If you wish to consider the novelization and program as extensions of the movie, then consider the Star Wars sketchbook from 1977, which also added to lore, such as the revelation that TIE stands for Twin Ion Engine, and the concept for a TIE boarding craft, later used to create the TIE bomber. But those are all reference books. From a narrative perspective, it was the first issue of Marvel's Pizzazz magazine that took the characters beyond the events in the film in the form of an untitled story that would later become known as The Keeper's World. A few weeks later, the 7th issue of the Star Wars comic title, and the first that was not an adaptation of the film, would hit the stands. It's entirely possible that some people got their hands on this issue before the Pizzazz magazine. Either way, both were by the same writers and artists, Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin. We mentioned beyond the events in the film earlier. One could have an hours-long philosophical debate on which publication featured the first true EU material. Was it a novel? Was it a comic? Was it a reference book? In this video, we want to delve into what these new stories not written by George Lucas were called early on. They certainly weren't called the Expanded Universe. But first, what was the name of the universe in which this fantastic film that took the world by storm in 1977 to be called? From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker was printed on the cover of the first edition paperback of the novelization. It's important to note that at the time, the first film was known as Star Wars, with the episode number and title not present in the opening crawl. The early drafts of the film had titles such as Adventures of the Starkiller or The Adventures of Luke Starkiller. It was clear from subtitles in these drafts that Star Wars was part of the story and not necessarily the name of the saga, at least at that point. Despite later re-releases seeing the addition of Episode 4, A New Hope to the crawl, which was originally removed due to both Fox and George's reservations about confusing the audience. Referring to the first film as Star Wars was a practice that carried on well into the 90s, even after Return of the Jedi was released. A prominent piece of evidence is the box cover of the excellent documentary on the making of the saga. It bears the name From Star Wars to Jedi. As well, the Nintendo game based on A New Hope that was released in 1991 is simply called Star Wars. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first novel published after the film, hitting the shelves in 1978. The cover doesn't even bear the name Star Wars, although the typeface and art made it clear which universe they were set in, if the towering Darth Vader in the cover art by the legendary Ralph McQuarrie weren't enough. The text above the title states, "From the Further Adventures of Luke Skywalker." The next year, Han Solo at Star's End was released, bearing the subtitle, "From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker." Per the script drafts and novelization, could Lucasfilm have intended to call the franchise The Adventures of Luke Skywalker? If so, would stories from other authors be referred to as The Further Adventures of Luke Skywalker, e.g., an expanded universe? It's interesting what George Lucas himself stated in the introduction of the 1997 edition of Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Let's read. Written by Alan Dean Foster, a well-known and talented science fiction author, Splinter was promoted as a further adventure of Luke Skywalker. It hit the bookstores just as I was preparing to write my own further adventure of Luke in the form of a script entitled The Empire Strikes Back. Besides being a long name, we've already established that the comic from Marvel kept the name Star Wars as the title of the series once it progressed beyond the adaptation of the film. As well, Star Wars was the main title on the fourth draft script of The Empire Strikes Back. The Han Solo and Lando Calrissian novels, released from 1979 to 1983, would not carry the Star Wars title, although variations of the based on language would appear on the covers. The Ewok movies would not use Star Wars in the title, while the Droids cartoon would, but not the Ewoks cartoon. When the action figure line based on the Ewoks cartoon was released, it did indeed bear the Star Wars title. Confused yet? Let's back up to 1980 when Bantha Tracks number 8 was released. The saga is referred to as the Star Wars Saga. Coupled with the fact that the fan club was named the official Star Wars fan club as far back as the year the film was released, it is clear that the name of the universe was Star Wars. Next week, part 2 of this mini documentary will be released.